Tom. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third of these community sessions hosted by Thirst. As always, I'm your host, Tom McDowell, and with us today is Heidi Kirby. Heidi, thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. And I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about just a topic that I think L&D just never talks about it. It's really weird. No, it's not AI, because I know we've got a real lack of AI conversation right now. It's that really under-discussed topic of skills. So that's now the entire sarcasm budget used up for this entire session. The rest of it will now be real content, I promise. So upskilling, reskilling, and the future of workplace skills. Skills, and skills more of the time. There's loads we can discuss here. But I want to start, before we dive into the content, just saying, Heidi, for anyone who's totally unaware of who you are, if such a person exists, tell us a little bit about you. Who are you?
Sure.
What do you do? Why are you here?
Hi, like you said, I'm Heidi Kirby. I am, what do I do? I do so many things. I am a learning and development consultant and the founder of Useful Stuff. And I've also just joined PARTA as their Chief Learning and Experience Officer. I have an L&D podcast called the Block Podcast. And I'm oddly and nerdily, can nerdily be a word, excited about learning and development and spend way too much time talking about it.
Well, I feel like you might fit in with our group. I think the one thing I've kind of realized is the people joining us week after week kind of fit into that same category. Like, it's Wednesday afternoon. What do you want to do? Obviously, I want to go spend an hour talking about L&D with people online. On that note, then, those of you who are joining us live, please do dive into the comments and be active, get involved. If you've got questions, if you've got thoughts, if you disagree with something we're saying, let us know. But to get things started, please do just let us know, where are you joining from and what is your initial thinking around upskilling, reskilling, and the future of workplace skills? Is this just a topic that is it a topic you're new to? Is it a topic you're well versed in? Do you have a particularly spicy, as I think the kids say, opinion that you'd like to share? If so, this would be a good time to do it. We've got a couple of kind of questions we want to talk about and that we think are important to have in this discussion. And then we've got maybe one bonus question that we'd like to explore at the end that maybe falls into that slightly warmer topic at the end. But to get us started, let's talk a little bit about the landscape we find ourselves in, which I guess is largely dictated by change and pace of change. Heidi, do you want to talk to us a little bit about where we are? Because I know when we spoke, you had some pretty strong ideas on this stuff.
Yes. So if you're not aware, the COVID pandemic changed the world of work so drastically. And I talk about this all the time, right? That we're more global than ever. We're more remote than ever. We have more ability to, move workplaces, move jobs. The gig economy is more popular than ever. And so from the World Economic Forum report, which Tom, you and I have talked about before in other recordings, 63% of employers identify skill gaps as a major barrier, right? But on the other hand, 40% of those core skills are expected to change by 2030, right? So I am very glad that people have stopped asking my child what he wants to be when he grows up, because we don't know. I don't think his job yet exists, right? He's only 8 years old. And with the rapid pace that everything is changing, the fact that 85% of employers plan to prioritize upskilling is promising, but also a little bit scary, right?
Absolutely. And I think that it's worth really acknowledging that that pace of change is very, very different. And one of the great things actually about the World Economic Forum reports is that the QR code there on the screen, if you are interested, takes you to this year's report, but they go back for years. So you can see this kind of really quite sudden, actually ramping up of what these numbers look like.
Yeah.
Especially, it does kind of bear mentioning, largely in the kind of Western economies, it's far
Mhm.
more noticeable. Um, and there's questions about why that is, obviously, whether it's the kind of lack of adaptability that's maybe crept into our economies and workplaces, or maybe it's the availability of the technology or the cost of the technology. There's lots
Sure.
of variables there, but it's really interesting to see how that's built up over time and how this is a significant change for us. um,
Absolutely.
it reminds me of where, like, my first L&D role. I'm not sure if you've ever done this, where you've spent a lot of time kind of carefully crafting skill profiles, skill lists, skill taxonomies manually, and how they would then be held in place for the next 3, 4, 5 years. And that would be, the gold standard, if you will, of what skills someone needs to do this job
Yeah.
well. And how now that is just so, I don't know, it seems utterly like an alien idea in this world we
Yeah.
find ourselves in.
Yeah. Or as I did, inherited those skill lists and couldn't find out where or when they were from. Yeah.
But this did, because I mean, not long ago, if you had, and I'll think back to the first role I ever really trained to work in, which is like an IT role. If you had your CompTIA A+ certification, your Microsoft certified networking professional, you were set for your career.
Sure.
That was your training done. You needed to keep afloat with, like, oh, we've gone from Cat 5e to Cat 5a or 6e or cable or whatever the new standards were. But broadly speaking, your skill set was down by the time you started the job.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's not just your industry. My mom was just telling me yesterday, she's a high school teacher, public high school teacher, and she's like, "Man, the amount of certifications we have to do this year have gone up exponentially, and I have to do a course on AI, and I have to do a course on this, and I have to," and she has to, like, I think she gets reimbursed, but she has to, like, pay for them up front and then get reimbursed later. So it's not just IT, right? It's not just those highly technical roles. It's also impacting other industries as well.
Definitely. And I guess kind of maybe an interesting spin-off from that, you immediately started talking about skills, and one of the first jokes here there was two courses. Thing, whether it was
Yep.
my CompTIA certification, which had a course and
Yep.
a certification exam, or your this public school one. So let's ask a question: are we confusing content with capability?
That's a really great question, because I have seen companies that go, we need to upskill, we need to reskill, we need to be prepared for the future. We need to be, we need to have a learning culture, right? And so they'll buy a giant course library, right? Thousands, tens of thousands of courses. They'll spend tens of thousands of dollars on a massive content course library from whoever and have that implemented, and then just kind of hand it to the employees and go, hey, we got you this thing. Here's all the learning you wanted, and good luck. Right. And there's no real kind of strategy around, are we giving people what they need? Are we giving people what they need for the job they have right now? Are we giving people what they need for the job that they want to have a year from now? Right. And without that intention, just kind of shoving content, large amounts of content at people, is really overwhelming. Right. It's like, I don't know if you've ever done this with your partner or your children or your whoever you watch TV with. Right. but you just spend an hour looking for something to watch because there's too many options and none of them are quite amazing enough to pick them. And we have the same problem with the content when we create so much and we just become kind of these order takers, these machines that are just cranking out, like you said, courses, courseware, course after course, certification. And, we have to get the most badges, we have to get the most certifications. And there's just a lack of intentionality that's actually taking away from that capability.
I think the thing that really strikes me about that is that it really falls into like what I started calling the workplace education trap, where we view ourselves almost as we're there to help people learn things, forgetting that that's fundamentally not, I would say, what we're there to do. We're there to help people do things, and not just anything, quite specific things. Not many people are that interested in exactly how to utilize the little PDAs that the postman use to scan the letters to make sure they're tracked correctly, unless they're a postman, in which case it's a massively important part of their job. Now, no one given a Netflix-esque experience is going to choose that piece of training.
Sure.
But if they've got that job and they're expected to scan X many pieces of post in X amount of time and then walk at X speed to deliver them within this time frame, then that training becomes extremely relevant, extremely contextual, extremely important to their ability to perform. But certainly in that, they say, in that sea of content where we view learning as the end goal, they're never going to find it. But more importantly, other things may catch their eye, and we end up with a very well trained, very well educated workforce who can't do their job.
Yeah.
Not ideal.
Yeah. So I think there's two separate things. Which way am I going to go first here? I think you're right. When the company I was working for launched a massive content library and just handed it out, they found that a couple of employees were spending most of their week taking courses. And they got in trouble, right? They got in trouble with their supervisors and their managers for spending so much time taking courses. And their rationale was, well, we wanted to be promoted. We wanted to be a better leader. We wanted to be a better employee. Like, we wanted to follow that path forward. And then they had to be told, like, hey, there's no path forward. There isn't really a path forward. We just gave you all these courses, right? Like, there's no promise of promotion, right? So if there's not a clear path forward and you're providing all this content, what the hell are you doing it for, right? Why are you giving them all of this? And the other point is, you brought up a really great example with like the whatever the mail person uses to scan the mail. Is content the right medium for everything, right? Like this, we default to e-learning, I feel like, a lot in L&D, right? But a well-placed job aid, a well-timed mentorship or coaching program, a well-timed email, right? How many e-learning courses have you taken that could have been a well-written email, right? Or a well-placed job aid, right?
Absolutely. And I think part of this is, obviously we're talking a lot about skills today, but it's very easy to assume that everything is a skill related issue. And I think when you take a kind of very, very long term view, the strategic view, if you will, as someone selling a book might say, we'll go tactical in a minute and then you'll know there's a book to be sold. But if you take that more long term view, skills are very, very important. They should be the core focus. But when you do narrow down to, is the current workforce performance, skills training is really difficult. It takes a long time. It's very inefficient in the grand scheme of things to train skills over simple task completion. And a lot of our jobs are simple task completion, as uncomfortable as that is to say sometimes. And that's not true for every job, to be entirely clear. If you are lucky enough to be a professional painter, your job is pretty much all skill and very little standardized task, other than prepping the canvas and cleaning the brushes. But for the vast majority of us, large amounts of us being highly performant are the accurate completion of preset tasks,
Mm.
or at least tasks within a framework that allows them to be relatively preset. So I guess my next question would be, and this is one actually that came in from sort of ahead of time, is how do we've sort of talked about not just it all being content all the time. How do we identify when we should be looking at a knowledge intervention? When should we be looking at a longer term skill intervention? When should we be looking at like a highly tactical task based intervention? And how do we avoid it just being, well, regardless of which one of those it is, training is still the answer?
That's a complex question. That's a very
Mm.
complex question. And I think that it assumes something that I want to step back and say, hey, whoa, let's not assume this. It assumes that we're doing some kind of needs assessment to find out what you're saying, right? Whether it is a knowledge problem, whether it is a skill, long-term skill problem, right? Because if we have somebody come to us and we say, okay, these some of our frontline workers are not shipping shipments correctly. They need to be upskilled. They're not doing their job correctly. We need a training, right? That's usually how the request comes in. If we start asking why, we might find out something as simple as the process is very complicated and it's not very clear how to do those task steps, like you said. And all they need is a new set of whatever the steps are. If it's an SOP, like whatever they need they just need a new process, right? And it's as simple as that. That's a knowledge problem, right? But if we get a request that says, well, we need a training for our managers because they're all jerks, and we go, well, why are your managers why do you say that the managers are all jerks? And then we find out, well, people are actually leaving the company and citing their managers, like, our Glassdoor ratings are terrible. Our employee exit interview surveys are saying that it's all the manager's fault. And, oops, we just hired a bunch of jerk managers that we don't know what to do, right? That's a problem where, okay, you either need to fix your hiring, right? Because it's not even a default training problem there, right? There's other interventions that could also help and could also make a difference. So is it, we need to have a whole leadership development program for the people that are already in place, or do we need to more carefully hire new people? And it's probably a little bit of both, right? And so realizing that training doesn't have to be only the intervention, right? It can be a good learning intervention consists of multiple things, right? Multiple ways of trying to solve the problem, right? And, I think we think of needs assessment as like this very big formal thing, and it doesn't have to be. We can just be like, well, why do you say you need a training, right? And if we, there's a technique called the 5 whys, right? I don't know if you've heard of it, but you ask why 5 times to get to the root cause of something, right? It's like a 2-year-old. So just imagine yourself as a small, curious toddler the next time you approach a training project and start asking that why. And as you get to the heart of what is the issue, you'll be able to see clearly whether it's a knowledge gap or a skill gap, right? And not only that, but you'll probably get a pretty good set of data. Like I mentioned, why are the managers jerks? Oh, well, our exit interviews and Glassdoor ratings. Whoa, there's something I can measure now and measure after I do whatever it is that I'm about to do and show some kind of difference and show some kind of ROI, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there was a really interesting bit in there about hiring. It was all interesting, to be clear, but that stuck in my mind because I was thinking about this not long ago, especially with regards to social learning and skills. Because I have no data to back this up. I will say it now, but I have a sneaking suspicion, having observed a lot of businesses now go through kind of we need to upskill and reskill, and there are skills gaps here, there, and everywhere. That the best skill transfer happens within social learning settings, not within formalized learning settings. Now, I'm sure that is not universally true. Nothing
Sure.
ever is. But that's been my sort of fairly consistent observation. And sometimes that is, to my mind, the whole argument for hiring in a skill set. If you kind of identify, you do solid analysis, you figure out you've genuinely got this skills gap in this specific area, you could invest huge amounts of time sending people on huge courses, taking years potentially to complete them to build this skill set. Or in the magic of the market, you could hire that skill set into your business
Mm.
and watch. I often describe social learning as it like leeching out of one person and into others around them.
Yeah.
Um, Except no one loses anything. Everyone just gains by exposure to a new skill set within the organization.
Mhm.
And it's amazing how not involved or lightweight that is for the L&D team compared to trying to deliberately train in a formalized setting a new skill set where there's genuinely a gap.
Oh, yeah, and I think L&D is also bad at hiring. I'm just gonna throw it out there because I think that I think everyone is bad at hiring, right? Because as a hiring manager, I did this at first too. You hire people who are like you, right? Who have a similar skill set as you do. Especially when you're a new manager or you're a manager that doesn't know the world that you've gotten into very well, right? We have a lot of managers come into L&D from elsewhere, and they'll read an article or they'll see something on LinkedIn that says the perfect L&D team is 2 IDs, the facilitator, and an LMS admin, and you should have this if you have an L&D team. And the truth is, it really depends, like what you're saying. What are you trying to accomplish? And find the people who have strengths that are different than yours and that are different than the other team members. And when I built a team like that, that team was the best team. Oh, I'm biased, but I think in the entire company, it was the most diverse team, but it was also the most talented team because we all had different strengths, and the amount that we learned from one another because we had those different strengths and everybody kind of had their little area that we
Mm.
would go to them for certain things. We all learned so much.
I think it's fascinating how that I don't think it's part of the skills conversation enough. Is that it's got the key unlocker in my mind to skills is that diversity within the team, and I'm not necessarily talking about the on paper diversity checklist
Yes.
thing. I'm talking very much about genuine. I would do this completely different to you because of this range of different experiences. Similar sort of team environment where I know I was working in a team where one person's background was all big tech companies, your Googles, your Microsofts, your all this is. Another person had only ever worked in small local organizations. The biggest team they'd trained was like 10 people, that kind of thing. The collaboration that I saw between those two people and the skill exchanges was just mind blowing. Like you would not be able to architect that as an L&D professional. You couldn't do it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So no, brilliant points there. So I'm going to move us on.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're going to spend the entire
We
time
will.
talking about this stage, aren't we? There was a great comment actually, though, from Laura about being frustrated that, yeah, projects fail at doing a needs analysis and just assume what
Yes.
people need. Sorry, and I think I suspect quite heavily that that's what happens in skills a lot because there are a lot of reports that tell us what skills everyone needs, and there's a little bit of a mirror movement, I think, in the content market. This report says we all need skills in how to use an LLM. The number of courses about how to use an LLM when the whole point is you just talk to it. That's what the technology does.
Yes.
Mm. But with that in mind, let's move on the conversation to who is involved in the skills conversation. I think I took these 4 points from our sort of pre-planning conversation for this session. So do you want to talk just a little bit about who you think should be involved in the skills conversation?
Yeah, and I think Laura's comment is a great segue into this because talking about assuming what the learners need, how many times do we as L&D professionals just take what a supervisor or manager is saying about their people at face value without actually talking to those people, right? And from my dissertation research, um, what I found was that so many skills, and let me back up for a minute. I looked at leadership skills that instructional designers need to successfully lead their projects for my dissertations. So I was reading all sorts of scholarly journal articles on skills for instructional designers, right? And so many of those journal articles relied on job descriptions as the source of truth for these skills, right? And if you look at a job description, if you really understand what a job description is, if you've worked in talent or HR, you know that it is a wish list, right? It is a list of at best, it is a wish list, right? It is a wish list of all the ideal things based on what the team has had prior and what they want to have in the future. It's a combined list of all those skills that they hope a candidate will have. Rarely does the candidate ever have all 100% of those skills, right? On the worst case scenario, job descriptions are copied and pasted from other job descriptions, right? If you have looked at instructional design jobs recently, you've probably still seen job descriptions that mention Flash, even though Flash is no longer. That's a really great indicator that someone has copied and pasted a job description. But we're relying on job descriptions for skills frameworks, right? We're relying on what leaders and supervisors are saying for the skills that their people need, instead of treating it more like a 360 performance review, right? If you know what those are, it's where you rate your own performance at the end of the year, and your team rates your performance, the people who report to you, and then your manager rates your performance. And all three of those are triangulated like data should be, right? And used to kind of assess your overall performance. We need to look at skills the same way. What are the skills that the people on the front line think they need to complete the job? What are the skills that their supervisors expect them to have? And then the people that they're reaching, whether that's a customer, a patient, a client, whoever it is that their work is reaching, what do they think those skills are that are needed as well?
And I think that the kind of the inclusion of the end user of the service or products or whatever it might be, I think is probably the most challenging thing to try and achieve, at least in
Yeah.
my experience. Often because you know you don't have them on tap like fellow employees of the company, right?
Yeah.
Um, but where you are able to bring them in, I think you can always, I don't know, on the few occasions I've been able to do it, that's where the gaps have really been highlighted, and not just the gaps in wording or semantics or application or anything like that. The genuine kind of "this is why your company sucks" gap. You know, all those bad reviews, this is where they're coming from, or your product is not out competing others because of this thing, or whatever it might be. But I think there's I don't know if you've got any thoughts about, you know, why is it not, it's difficult to do, but it sometimes feels like it's not even part of the conversation.
Yeah, I feel like it's not part of the conversation because a lot of people don't know how to scope those conversations, right? And I say this because I fell into a contract last year, and then quickly left it, because they wanted to do like a onboarding core values e-learning, right? Like they had acquired a couple additional companies, and so it's kind of like three companies coming together, and they want to kind of update onboarding and talk about the core values that all the companies share in general. And like, um, they wanted me to interview people. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure, great, of course. And then the interview list kept getting longer and longer and longer as ego started to come into play. And this person heard that I was interviewing this person, and this person wanted to be interviewed as well. And so I spent 15 hours or something ridiculous like that interviewing people. And I still had not really a lot of things to say in this onboarding course because everybody took that time to complain to me about the mergers and acquisitions and the problems and issues that they found with trying to make all of these companies come together, instead of focusing And like really what I should have done if I would have worked at the company and had a little bit more like higher site oversight is bring all those people into the same room and make them all talk at once, right? And have a discussion about it and hash out the tough part. But I think people get caught up because they're like, well, we have to talk to customers or we have to talk to clients. And then they make these grand questionnaires that are like 20 questions. And I'm like, we can't ask the clients 20 questions. We're not going to get good data. And it's just kind of there's a lack of good like research and data knowledge I find in a lot of L&D professionals. They're kind of like afraid of it a lot of times. I find like you say the word data and people kind of go, ooh, I don't do numbers. I want to work on, teaching and learning. But it's part of that, right? And if we continue to ignore the data, which can be something as simple as a story or something as innocuous as like the wherever your customers go to rate your product, right? Like that's a source of data that we can use and look at to start kind of getting an idea. And then, okay, from there, maybe we pick 3 or 4 people and we ask questions based on what we're seeing over here and target those questions to what we're trying to find out, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, and there was something interesting actually in the chat here from Laura again, coming in with a fantastic comment. I wonder if that stems from government training where they do job, duty, task analysis and build objectives from there. Yeah, I mean that's quite a maybe unsurprisingly for governments anywhere, that's quite a rigid framework to work
Yeah.
within, isn't it? Not necessarily a bad thing, to be very clear.
Yeah.
And I wonder if part of that is that idea of, and I'm not sure if it's the same globally here, if you became a civil servant or worked for government effectively, once you were into that world, you kind of expect to stay there.
Yes,
Um,
that's true here too.
mm.
Yeah.
So but I wonder if the thinking around, if you're not too worried about retention, you can train like that
Yes.
because you can just go, well, it's okay because we will just continually retrain them. We don't need to look too far ahead because their
Yeah.
job is to do the thing today, not worry about the thing tomorrow. Someone else's, there's a whole department probably worrying about that.
Sure.
Whereas I think in most organizations, there is a need for far greater elasticity because there is a much greater expectation of, people are going to move around the business much more quickly than they do in the civil service. People are going to leave
Sure.
and rejoin
Mhm.
and go somewhere else. And
Yeah.
so actually there's a bit of I don't know, a symbiotic relationship, if you will, between every L&D department in that the person you're training today might be that L&D team's problem in a year's time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
simultaneously, the people they're trading might come to you or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
They almost certainly will. So is there this kind of need for a more, not necessarily shared approach, but maybe just that shared understanding of, that difference between how people move in the workplace now?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good point because I do think, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we do in L&D comes from government, right? Comes from ed tech. Like that's the beginnings of instructional design and instructional systems design and, using training during World War II. And so of course we adopt a lot of things from the government, but I think it's important for us to realize when the corporate work world has changed and shifted enough that we have to kind of shift our mindset and our perspective as well.
I think Laura Overton always puts it the way I love the best, which is the world of work is messy.
Yes.
And we're doing good work where we're in there getting messy as well,
Yeah.
which is just a nice, realistic way, I think, of viewing it. Along with everything we discuss on here, it's all lovely ideas, but then when it hits the road, it's never going to look quite like it does on the webinar or in the
Of course.
textbook. It's going to be some horribly mangled version, but if it works, then you did it well. That's the only thing that matters.
True. Yeah.
Um, so I guess moving on to our next point, measuring skills. Now, our pre-conversation on this was quite interesting. So why don't you jump in first? How on earth do we measure a skill?
Yes. So I will start by saying that one way not to measure a skill is by looking for an 80% score on a multiple choice quiz. Okay. That can be, let me back up for a minute and say that can be part of how you measure. But if that and a how did you like it survey are the only thing that you're measuring, you are absolutely missing a whole host of data that your company already has in existence, that already existed when you were having the conversation. Because remember, like I said, if you keep asking why, you find out where these things are coming from, right? And wherever they're coming from, that root cause, there's usually some kind of data, something, even if it's just anecdotal. Qualitative data still counts as data, right? Even if it's just two of our senior leaders think this, right? Then you take their thoughts, you put them down on paper. That becomes your initial data point. You ask them their thoughts again after the intervention, and there's your data, right? But I think a lot of times we think about these, okay, well, if I just have a multiple choice question for every learning objective and people answer those correctly, that means that they're skilled. Well, I don't know if you've ever taken any e-learning, Tom. And if you've ever answered questions like I do. But I intentionally fail a lot of e-learnings that I am forced to take because I don't like taking e-learning to begin with. And part of the reason I think I'm a good instructional designer is because I'm a terrible student. I do not want to do the work, right? And so I fail a lot of e-learning courses that their assessments, right? And I don't learn anything from the assessment itself, except whether or not someone knows how to design one. There was a compliance course I took recently, information security, where I failed the e-learning, as I often do. And it said, congrats, here's your certificate of completion. And I had gotten a 0% on the quiz. So I encourage people to focus on the learning outcome, not the objectives. And by outcome, I mean, what is that overall goal, right? If I'm creating an onboarding, like I mentioned earlier, an onboarding on the core values of the company, what's the goal there? Is it to tell people what the core values are? Is it to get people to be invested in those core values as they start their new job here? Is it to clearly communicate them so that if somebody is like, whoa, these are not my core values, they know that they should probably leave before they even get started? Like, what is the overall goal? Why are you doing what you're doing? And if it's to check a box, it's probably going to be pretty hard to measure, right? But if you can get to that goal, get to the heart of it, right? Like we talked about the leadership development thing, right? Where if all our managers are jerks, what's the goal? It's for our managers not to be jerks anymore. So how do we measure that, right? We have to somehow get some feedback on their current performance, right? So that's the observable behaviors part, right? If we are observing the behaviors, if we are seeing a problem, and a lot of times training requests come in because someone sees a problem somewhere, right? We can go observe that. We can find the existing business data that exists around that, right? Is it a customer thing? We need more customer education. Why? Because our help desk is inundated with customer requests on this new feature that we just launched, and we don't have enough education on it. Okay, there's the data point. Those help desk tickets, we look at those now and we look at those after the intervention, right? It's about knowing who to talk to, knowing where to find that data that already exists within your organization, and not thinking so narrow about data, right? It doesn't have to be assessments. It doesn't have to be surveys. It can be stories. It can be ratings. It can be help desk data. All the other departments in your organization are collecting data constantly. And it's up to us to learn how to leverage that to measure the impact of what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. And I guess there's two kind of practical elements that I just want to sort of latch onto there. The first one around kind of behaviors, which is to me, observing a change in behavior in the real world is still like the gold standard of, yes, this worked. Because that's the moment where you can really go, yes, It's happened. I saw it with my own eyes. However, there are usually very few of us and many, many more employees in the business than we can possibly observe. So if you are trying to measure skills and skill development, line managers are the only way you can actually achieve observation, because you cannot do it.
Yeah.
You will
Yeah.
kill yourself trying. Also, we're not good at it because we're not there enough. We
Yes.
we do not have the context of maybe this person always did that thing and you just happened to train them to do it more because no one else on the team was. So
Sure.
line manager engagement, I think, is, I mean, broadly, we underutilize line managers in L&D. And I get that sometimes there's the, oh, but line managers don't want to get involved. But I feel like that's a double, there's another side to that where perhaps we have not always been the most gracious and inviting of departments to work with for line
Sure.
managers.
Sure.
Because just as when we go, oh, I've already got a million things on, guess what? Line managers have also got a million things on.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and the second thing is that there is a sort of tech situation evolving around how we sort of or how we use data and our relationship with data in L&D, and it is partially driven by some AI stuff, but it's a lot of other things as well. Broadly, it's the much tighter integration of systems within our organization. This is making it far easier for us to get to the data because it
Yeah.
is now generally in more shared pools. But the one thing that kind of AI is giving us, which I strongly think it's actually where the real value in AI is to us today, um, is in its ability to look at vast amounts of qualitative data that we would have to spend a huge amount of time going through and
Yeah.
very quickly tell us, is sentiment improving or getting
Yeah.
worse? Are there, what kind of language is coming out more now than it was before? These kinds of analyses are vital to us understanding what's really going on, but incredibly time consuming to do as a human being. An LLM with the right plugins for data accuracy, etc., AI is not always accurate, caveat there, can make that task minutes,
Yeah.
maybe an
Mhm.
hour tops if you've got a huge data set, and
Absolutely.
just give you that easier steer, shall we say. So those are my two things there. But,
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Good point.
cool. And I'd love to hear in the chat kind of what are you doing around measuring skills? Because I think this is certainly when we're chatting, I kind of realized this is the area where I think why most reskilling fails. I don't necessarily think, some it's the needs analysis, some it's, fundamentally not needing to do it in the first place. But I think of those who should be doing it, this is a major stumbling block of,
Mm,
did it work? Do we know? It kind of all falls apart at that point, at which point it's very difficult to get the business to buy into a future reskilling effort.
agreed.
Um, got some great stuff coming out there. Here's an interesting one. How do we, this is from Leanne, how do we adapt these ideas to industries that need to move quicker? Oh,
That's a really good question. And what I found is that you have to start small and pick your battles, right? Just like with anything. And you have to be able to show, not tell, right? As an English professor, it makes me so happy to be able to still say this and give this as advice because this is what we give in writing advice too. But you really have to show people that you're working with, the leadership, the stakeholders, the subject matter experts, why it is that you're asking the questions that you are, why it is that you need the data that you need, and what you're trying to prove and what you're trying to show. And I have yet to meet, there have been a few, but I can count on one hand the number of people who I really presented why I was doing something, why I needed the data, what I was going to try and show with the data, what my intervention was. If it wasn't an e-learning, sometimes, our stakeholders need to see something if it doesn't look like what they expect, right? So if we have like a prototype, and every time I've shown leaders that, they've been receptive. They've gone, oh, okay, I get it. Like, okay, I'm on board and now I'm bought in, right? And I can count the number of times on one hand that I've had people go, I see what you're saying, but no, I just want it done fast and I want it done the way I said. And those contracts I've left. So those people I'm like, well, I can't work with you because we're not aligned, right? But then I find that out very quickly, right? And like I said, it's only happened a few times. More often than not, if you show people, if you explain it, right? Because we often think that, like, if somebody comes to us with a training request, they understand their request. And a lot of times they don't. A lot of times they're just asking for an e-learning or a training because that's what they've seen in the past, right? And so it's up to us to be the experts. It's up to us to show people that it doesn't have to be that way, that it can be different, that, you know, this is the data we're trying to collect and why we're trying to collect it.
I think the only thing I'd jump onto my L&D hobby horse at the moment, which is experimentation, which is, you know, in an environment where you are moving quicker, the quicker you move, the higher the risk attached to that movement is. And the easiest way that you can both get to do a solid needs analysis and make sure you're making all the right moves in terms of reskilling and upskilling is to engage in experimentation. And you can say to your business, this is not wasted time. What I am doing is de-risking your L&D activity. Because
Yes.
if we get this wrong, we know it's attached to employee retention. The quickest way to stop moving quickly is to lose your staff and have to start from day one again. That will kill dead their desire for agility or rapid evolution of ideas or whatever it is they want to move quickly regarding. So experimentation, broadly speaking, two phases: discovery and validation. Discovery is those broad kind of, what direction should I be moving in? Validation is, this idea the best possible idea to take forwards?
Yeah.
But most importantly, you can do tiny little experiments. Experiments don't have to be 12-year longitudinal studies. In fact, they almost never should be. They should be, what is the smallest amount of effort I can expend to increase certainty and decrease the risk of this potential way forwards? Do that, move forwards. Then decide, same question again, what's the smallest thing I can do to increase certainty and decrease risk? Keep following that path. The business will be happy because you're not wasting resource. You are moving quickly and efficiently, but you are also getting to do your needs analysis, your gap analysis, your task analysis, everything along the way, just in an incremental and experimental format.
Yeah.
So don't obsess over going, we need a needs analysis period, because that does sound like it's going to take forever, right? Instead, we're going to engage in some rapid experimentation. There we go. Cool. Oh, here's an interesting one. I don't want to take too long on questions, but there's a really good question there.
It's a good one.
So from Katrina, is it truly skills that we are trying to measure, or is it characteristics strokes personality that we are trying to identify that makes someone great? Oh, I've got opinions there. Heidi, you go first.
Oh, I'm interested in your opinion. So I think the answer is yes, both, right? I think there's some work that's done in kind of the talent management space that looks specifically at high potentials or high performers and looks inherently at those characteristics and personality traits that make them great, and then tries to then teach that to others, right? There's some models that kind of operate like that. And I don't know how I feel about those, honestly. But I think that those characteristics or those personality things, right? Like, think about, we were talking about hiring before. And I think you can look for those skills as characteristics that someone inherently has, right? I have inherent leadership skills. How do I know this? Because all of my younger cousins, I'm the oldest out of like 10 cousins, they called me when I was growing up bossy pants. So I just have inherent leadership skills, for instance. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that I'm a good leader, right? It means that I have inherent leadership skills. If they're not fostered, if I don't have the ability to lead a team, if I don't have the ability to utilize those anywhere, maybe they're not skills and they just remain kind of characteristics, or I'm just like a really good high performer as an individual contributor, and they just keep giving me more and more tasks. This is true story. But you know, if we can look at those inherent characteristics, build those and elevate those, but then also focus on what's not inherent and look at that. Like, I feel like everything can be taught, right? To an extent, right? There's always exceptions, but you know, I say it all the time because people are like, you know, this person is really like, this person is a really great candidate to become an instructional designer. This person should transition into instructional design. And I'm always like, hey, wait, anybody can be an instructional designer. Like anyone can build that skill set. It doesn't take a certain type of person or a certain inherent set of skills, but it is about looking at what you already have inherently, boosting that, and then what you lack and creating that, if that makes sense.
I don't want to take up loads of our time on this one because I think that was a really good positive answer. I will just spend 30 seconds saying I think L&D and HR and talent management should stay a million miles away from anything with the word personality attached to it. I think it's
True.
it's the most powerful exclusionary tool business has ever got its hands on, and it's wielded it to incredible effect to keep certain groups of people out of not just the workplace but specifically senior positions. I remember not that long ago publicly saying that you were introverted was a death nail in your career. That was it. You were not going to be a manager. You were not going to be a top performer. That was it. You're done. You may as well start looking for a new job. So I think anything that claims to look at personality, categorize personality, identify personality traits that the business does or doesn't want is inherently dangerous and should be gotten rid of. It's a
That's,
strong
yeah.
opinion, I will admit
No,
that, but
you're right. I wasn't thinking about it in terms of like personality
mm,
tests or like hiring based on that, but no, I completely agree. Anything personality related, touching hiring, bad, 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 bad.
with that said, let's move on because I don't want to spend too long on it because I know I can go on for a little while. We've got a couple more key questions and we've only got 8 minutes. So let's see if we can rapid fire these and I'll try and stay quiet for a little while. Heidi, how can we acknowledge and reward skill development?
Yes. So, as you see here, it says not with badges. What did we say yesterday? Badges are bad. Badges equal bad. So here's the thing. Badges are cool, right? Everyone likes a cool badge. If that weren't true, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts would not still be giving them out to this day, but they have to mean something. Okay. And if they are only used within your organization by your L&D department, if that's the only place where they have meaning, they don't really mean much at all, do they? And we're focusing on the way wrong thing, right? What we should be acknowledging and rewarding skill development with is pathways to promotions, right? Getting people to not leave your company, because what inevitably happens once somebody gets the skills that they need to do better than what they're currently doing in their role, well, they want to move up. And if you don't make a clear path for them to do that, they're going to go somewhere else. That's what I've done so many times in my career. And I've said multiple times, oh, you know, in corporate, the only way to move up is to move out, because that has been the reality at most of the places that I've worked, where they're going to give me badges. They'll give me a t-shirt with the company logo on it if I complete all the onboarding courses in the first 30 days. But that t-shirt goes to Goodwill the second I leave their company for somebody else, because now my skills have gone above and beyond the role that I'm in, but you're not leaving a place for me to move into or to be promoted to. So how can we acknowledge and reward skill development? I'm pretty sure everybody who's listening in right now will agree that money is the best motivator. Give your people a raise, give them a means to a promotion. Instead of badges or pizza parties or swag, like give them concrete career things, right?
Absolutely. I think this is somewhere where, especially tech startups, get this right. They really do. Like the number of people who will go from a junior to a developer to a senior to a lead. Now, all they've done is actually just upskill. They've demonstrated a level of skill in the role. They've not become a line manager. They have just evolved in their position, allowing them to earn more, to have a better job title, which still means a lot to a lot of people and will impact on their future career. It's that nod to the fact of you have become more skilled and therefore more valuable, and we acknowledge and appreciate that. Not here's a badge for logging in 6 times this week on the LMS, which is not inherently a good thing. You had to come in 6 times. That might mean things are hard to find. It's a really difficult space, this, because I think there was a promise of micro credentials traveling between jobs, right? This was the long-term promise of things like Credly and all the
Yeah.
kind of blockchain enabled skill movement stuff, but it's not quite come to fruition. Like, there aren't many badges or certifications that truly travel with you that you do through work. I think that would be a nice move to see, but it would require a lot of businesses working together, maybe in
Yeah,
set industries.
it would.
Um, so I said if we had time, I would ask a slightly risky question, as it were. And I say this with someone who spent a lot of time and has a very soft spot in my heart for skills and competency frameworks. But do they have a future in L&D? Heidi.
As any good answer, it depends, right? If you have the structure and the support within your organization to really truly create a skill framework and to update it regularly and to really, like we talked about, get those skill perspectives from the outside world, the people doing the job, and their supervisors. If you really have the means to put that in place and the support, that's a huge one, the buy-in and the support from your leadership, because it's not with AI and with all the different tools, like you were talking about, the integration with other tools that we have, it's not as hard as it used to be to set that up, right? But because it is constantly changing, oh, well, we have to look at all the job descriptions for everybody in our entire organization and pull out the skills and make a matrix. And then that just lives on our intranet for the next 10 years. That's not going to be good enough, right? So for the people who are kind of becoming skills-based organizations who are not doing it just based on role, but are also saying, oh, everybody in our organization needs this skill, right? And are not kind of siloing based on that and saying, okay, well, difficult conversations, everyone needs that. This certain technical skill, this department needs that, right? I think that there can be a place for it. But I think that it requires intention and strategy that I have not seen with skills frameworks that I've encountered.
I think I'm inclined to agree. I think they are going to have to become much more dynamic. They're going to have to become more user generated. I think we're going to become
Yeah.
much more reliant on people doing the job, defining the skills that they have or need. And so it's almost going to become more of a tagging exercise.
Yeah.
So that we're trying to figure out, okay, so you did this, this, and this, and you got this out of it. So we'll tag that as this. The user would maybe go, oh, this is the skill I felt that I got out of this, or this is the skill that I'm exercising when I do the following things. That's going to require much closer collaboration and the surrendering of some control, which we
Yes.
have not historically been marvelous at in the past as an industry, because we often like to consider ourselves the experts and we must carefully craft everything. But actually, perhaps the accuracy of your skills framework in the truest sense is less important than its contextual relevance to the audience who are trying to exist within it or use it. Is
Yes.
perhaps going to be the thing that drives that change or kills your skills framework altogether, whichever one comes to pass. We are, however, really hard up against time. So if anyone's got a question we can answer in like less than 60 seconds, now is the time. But if not, and most importantly, I want to thank you, Heidi, for sharing all your thoughts with us today, and everyone in the audience for joining us for this conversation midweek, no less, on Wednesday. Heidi, if people want to carry on the conversation or find you, where's the best place to do so?
Find me on LinkedIn. I'm always hanging out there, and that's the best place to find me and everything I'm working on.
Fantastic. Well, Oh, we have got one question
We
come
do
in.
have one question.
When you talk about skill, is it about hard skills, performing a job, or soft skills, being human?
All of the above.
Absolutely. Both are extremely valid and should be treated with great respect, if not
Absolutely.
care. Marvelous. Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being involved. We will be back next month with another session. Details of that will be coming out to you all shortly. But please do share with us as well on social media. Tag us. What are you taking away from this session? Engage in a little bit of post-webinar reflection. It's lovely to be here, but it only really matters if you make a change in your own practice based on what we've discussed today. And hopefully, we'll see you again next month.